Okay, so hey everybody, and welcome to Airbnb One-on-One. I'm so glad that you're here today and just very grateful that you're investing the time in hearing about this topic. I am pumped about it, to say the least. So my aim for today's session is to demystify the process, help you understand some of the nuances of just buying investment real estate in general, but especially what you need to know going into really like finding it's all about the right property. And that's what you hear with all, real estate investing. It's property by property, whether your strategy is a short-term rental, a long-term rental, a flip, something else. So that is going to be kind of a big focus of today, of just kind of like the mistakes that you can avoid, things to be aware of, because there are some very specific trouble spots that you could find yourself in if you don't have the right information about the neighborhoods and the cities that you're looking at for short-term rental. And then I'm also going to break down just kind of some of the basics of things you need to know to actually set the property up for success from both like a systems, a technology standpoint, inside the house. None of it's rocket science. It is a lot. So, again, today's going to be recorded. I actually was just thinking before I got on the Zoom that I should probably type up some crib notes for people who want that. So there's going to be like a follow-up email with like a couple different things, just so you have some like templates and checklists to work off of if you want to get going. So I'm just going to start with a tiny bit of backstory of why I'm even talking about this topic. So I've been in the real estate industry for almost 20 years. For the bulk of that, I've sold houses and led a team that has sold houses. I didn't really take on the identity of real estate investor until a couple years ago. So yeah, my experience for the majority of my career was, concentrated on helping buyers and sellers in the Baltimore, Maryland market, which I loved and kind of didn't really have an interest in getting into investing. And really, as I was like preparing for today, and I've talked about this in various settings of like, I had a lot of beliefs and thoughts that just kept me from getting into investing. So when I was really probably more like overwhelmed in my business and kind of like overworking, you might say, I knew that I didn't have the time. So that was just a fact of for something like going after like a flip property where you would really be like overseeing a renovation. So like that was one thing that really held me back, was like saying to myself, I don't have the time to do this. But more than that, I would say it was confidence of despite all of the expertise that I have and knowing that I have like a good head on my shoulders, I just was intimidated by what happens. It felt like higher stakes than, helping clients with their, the process that I knew really, really well. So just like, what if I buy a house that, is a lemon and has a ton of problems? Or, you can just kind of imagine all the things that could go wrong. What if I think it's going to rent for this much, but I only get that much, and then I'm stuck with a mortgage? And those are all really valid concerns. And I think that, there's something to be said for doing things at the right time for you and for me. But I also think that sometimes it's easy to just kind of stay stuck and not pursue something that's of interest because of the intimidation factor. And that's where I'm like, okay, knowledge is power. And I've, experienced that phenomenon many times. And really, what happened for me was last year at the beginning of 2022, I realized that I was surrounded by these really awesome women that were doing really big things with Airbnbs. So one of my team members, Diana, and then Diana has a colleague who is basically an Airbnb designer, property manager. She does this thing called co-hosting that I'll explain a little bit more. And then someone else in my network, she was like building this whole Airbnb property, like empire on her own property. She owns some land up in I think she's in Harford County, maybe northern Baltimore County, but she was like Airbnb-ing her basement. And then they got a school bus and turned that into an Airbnb. And she was doing all these creative things. Last I checked, they were working on converting a barn into a third unit. So basically I was like, can I get you ladies together and do a panel about Airbnb investing, which by the way, that panel is great. And I'm going to share that in the follow-up today. It's really me interviewing them and hearing kind of their different experiences and perspectives on different segments of it. I'm going to touch on a little bit of some of what I talked about with them, but that would be a great follow-up for anyone who wants to like take this a step further after watching and listening today. But what happened for me was, one of the cool things about like preparing for a panel and like prepping and talking to them beforehand and then actually interviewing them and like getting the answers to their questions, it just like demystified so much of the process for me. It inspired me. And basically, I think we did that panel in February of last year. And I have had a dream forever of owning a house in Hilton Head. It's really been I say to people, it's like my only life goal that I ever had was to have a house there someday. Like there's not been like a lot of things on my vision board overall. So after hosting that panel last year, I was like, wow, I could probably do this. And then I'd been already kind of like watching listings in that market, but then I went and got the right realtor for the area. And we were under contract on something by April, closed at the end of May. And then I did something kind of crazy, which was got the property ready in like 10 days. We had it live on Airbnb by June 4th of last year. We have been like 98% occupied since the day we opened. So we've had really great success with the house. And I will say like a few of the factors of why things have worked so well with that property, and not without some real stress and problems along the way, but overall, like big picture, number one, we bought in a very strong location for like the house. It's not on the beach, but it's a close walk to the beach and it's just in a really great spot. So location is always a driver in real estate. The second thing is Hilton Head has really transformed in the last 10 to 15 years, but especially post-COVID, of being much more of a year-round market. It used to be more of a seasonal destination. So the demand is really strong. So, looking at location and demand and kind of simple factors like that, that has been a huge part of our formula for success, as well as, the part where I would give myself maybe the most credit is that we, on a shoestring budget, decorated it as cute as humanly possible, got incredible photos, did all the things right with, marketing on Airbnb. And then my husband and I have made it a huge priority to provide such a good customer experience for our guests. And I learned I read some great Airbnb books I could recommend if anyone wants to know. And I'm kind of using Airbnb as the term, but some people use Vrbo and other websites. Although we've had way more success with Airbnb than we're listed on Vrbo, and 95% of our rental traffic has been through the Airbnb site. So there's a lot of nuance to all of that, but I read a bunch of books and kind of just looked at like all the best practices of like, how do you get a 5-star review every single time? And how do you earn Superhost status as fast as you can? So we've really like focused on, having a really successful launch, being very like on top of quick responses, kind of being over the top to solve any little problems where people just feel so happy and grateful and compelled to write a review. So now we just have like a great listing with, I think, almost 35-star reviews, and we haven't even been online for a year, and most of our rentals are a week, if not longer. So that's just kind of like the picture of where it's gone. Later, when I share some of like the biggest mistakes and lessons, I'll talk about some of the things that have been stressful about it. But that is kind of why I wanted to do this today, because for me, this has been a way to cover-ish our costs on our dream vacation home. And, there's a lot more I'm going to say today about kind of like year one versus year 2, 3, 4, as far as like your startup costs and whether you can even be profitable at the beginning with all of the outlay for acquisition, furnishing, decorating, dealing with early vacancies and all that kind of stuff. So that is why I am here. I will say that I am, I don't have 25 Airbnbs. I just have one, but I do feel like I have some good experiences to share and some great lessons. So that is where we are going. And you'll see me glancing down because I have notes. Otherwise, you never know what tangent I might go off on. So we're going to start with kind of some tactics of the big picture of like, is this the right investment strategy for you now or in the future, and kind of some big things to think about. So number one, with investment properties in general, it's all about doing your homework. And I would say way more homework than a home that you're going to live in. There's just a lot more to figure out at the front end. So I wouldn't want to overwhelm anyone with that, but I think you just have to know very clearly that there's a lot more that goes into the financials and the projecting the income and the expenses. With a, house you're just going to live in, it's normally just about like, assuming you're going to have a mortgage, what's the mortgage payment going to be? Can I pay that through like what I make? It's just like, it's very straightforward. And then, house by house, of course, you're analyzing what you're getting into as far as the systems and the problems that the house might have. So with an investment property, you need to get good data on what that income flow is actually going to be. And there's not necessarily one like super convenient, 100% accurate, definitive source for that, which I'm going to explain a little bit more. But that's kind of one of the very big things at the front is, not making pie in the sky assumptions or just having no idea what you're getting into as far as income and expenses. And I'm going to give you guys a budgeting template as a little takeaway from today. So that'll be a really thrilling spreadsheet for you to dig into. The second key thing to think about with all of this is it can't be an emotional purchase because of what I just said, unless you can just afford to make a huge, financial mistake, and it's no big deal. But, I think can be very common in like residential real estate to fall in love with a house. And a lot of the times that, I see with buyers, it can be very like aesthetically driven, even like great staging can just win someone over and help them have a vision for how they could live in a property. And so with investment real estate, it's wise to be much more, hard-nosed, numbers driven, patient, disciplined, and willing to, wait until the right property comes along that meets the criteria that you need it to meet. So I'm going to say this a lot today, but that is where I think, having a great real estate agent guiding you through whatever market. And we have a great mixed audience of people who are watching this. Some are people in real estate, some are people who are not. But either way, someone who knows that market and also has the patience to kind of work through that process with you, because sometimes working with investors, it's not the easiest, fastest sale, because if I have a cutoff of like, I'm only going to pay this much for this kind of property, and it just takes a while, you just want to be partnered with someone who gets that and then can also provide all the counsel that you need for projecting income and expenses and the resources and understanding the restrictions and the legalities of that market. So those are a couple things to be really aware of going in. You want to, unless you're super seasoned in all things, in that market and in real estate, having someone represent you is smart and wise. I will say that I picked a realtor for my Hilton Head purchase. It's funny, beach markets, it's just the realtor population. It took me a few tries to find someone that was like as professional and full-time and all of that as I was like looking for. And they were pretty good, but there were definitely things that they were not as detail oriented as the kind of agent. If I could have just painted the picture of like the perfect person to represent me, like I found out after we settled that Hilton Head had just imposed a new regulation that all short-term rentals had to be registered with the town of Hilton Head, and you had to pay a fee and you had to do X, Y, and Z. Luckily, it was all within the like reasonable kind of realm of something that we could roll with without having a lot of issues. But there was a part of the pending legislation that was going to say that you needed to have an on-site property manager who could be there within 30 minutes. And I don't have that because I self-manage. So that's the kind of thing that in my ideal world would have been in the, early rundown from the agent I hired to say, hey, like, just so you know, like, this is a huge topic happening in Hilton Head right now. It's not in writing anywhere, but it's in the news, but you don't know this because you don't live here. So that is where having local on the grounds expertise. And I could give you a couple other examples of things like that as well. Someone who's more connected to the short-term rental market is probably going to have the best referrals for you, for cleaners, for handymen, for vendors. So that's why I think, besides just knowing what your overall personal strategy is and picking what market you're going to be in, the next most important thing after that is having the right professionals advising you, so you aren't, closing on a property and having surprises that change, your revenue, all those kinds of different things. So the other couple, there's basically two other kind of warnings / thought processes that I give. Getting into the short-term rental business, it's more than just a rental property. So if you were to take on buying or, managing a long-term rental, that comes with its own set of responsibilities. There's sort of the big picture stuff of, finding a tenant, getting it rented, making sure the house is in good condition and, not going to have a lot of like maintenance things popping up all the time. And then dealing with maintenance things and issues with the tenant as they arise, which if you're basically managing a house that's in good, well cared for condition, and you've vetted and found strong tenants who don't have trouble paying the rent and things like that, it can be very, very low key in my experience. When one or two of those things is not in alignment, it can be quite stressful and maybe not taking over all day, every day, but it can definitely be challenging. I've had I have one long-term rental as well. And I've had times where I've had great tenants and I've had times where I've had problem tenants. And that can be, really kind of dictate what the experience is like and how much time and just sort of, like psychological energy when you're just dealing with, unexpected things coming out of nowhere, unexpected expenses, rent not being paid, et cetera. So with a short-term rental, you're dealing with a similar set of issues. But you're also like in the hospitality business. So on top of making sure that the property's in good condition and things like that, you're also, dealing with customers who are like checking in regularly. You need to be comfortable or hire a manager and have the budget for that, for them to deal with all of the inbound questions, the door lock, I can't get on the Wi-Fi, like all those kinds of different things. I thought the pool was open. Where, how do I get in there? So there's all those kinds of things that you can definitely deal with really proactive systems and templates and information. But ultimately there's a higher level of customer service, more of like a hospitality level, especially with Airbnb specifically, where people, they know it's not a hotel, but it's to them more than just renting a random house where they don't expect any assistance with anything. But you're also operating a business where you are probably making an investment in upfront inventory, from furnishing the property, decorating it, to even just paying for all of the consumables like toilet paper. And like we provide a little more than the average in our house. Like we always make sure that there's olive oil and this, that, and the other thing. So none of it is super high expense, but there's just, you're operating a mini business is really, I guess, what I'm like saying in kind of like a long form. So just knowing what you're getting into as far as the finances, the cash flow that you might be putting out every month, regardless of occupancy levels, and just what the kind of the expectation is customer service wise, if you're going to be, a customer service driven Airbnb. And if you're not going to be, you get bad reviews and they might even review you from the platform. So that's just kind of the game. And I will say, and some of my colleagues are on here, Melissa knows, like when we've had, a couple problem tenants, like there is sort of this power dynamic where I know that if I don't solve problems quickly enough or please the customer, we're not going to get that 5-star review. Our rating is going to go down. Your superhost status on Airbnb recalibrates every quarter. So I actually it's so funny. We just earned superhost again for the first quarter. I guess they do that in April for, January through March. So we've, just earned superhost for, I guess, the third quarter in a row. But you do, as the Airbnb owner and operator, like your reviews are kind of always on the line, not to make it like super dramatic, but that's something that I'm aware of every time something pops up. So that is where I just say, okay, please don't let this like intimidate you, but you do just want to have a sense of what you're getting into as far as, the setup of the property, but then also the ongoing maintenance and management. Now, if you have the budget in your, your revenue and all of your expenses to have a manager, a good manager who will also provide the kind of service that I was just articulating, then that's a way to really like remove that stress and time from your day to day, which is a wonderful thing as well. So those are kind of the big picture things that I want you to just kind of digest a little bit. Then from there, there are 3 key questions that I recommend asking yourself before you buy a property. So number 1 is, what can I afford? So if you're just paying cash, that's pretty straightforward. You know what your budget is. Although the only not straightforward thing is there's the price to acquire the property, and then there's how much money it's going to take to get the house into the condition that you need it to be for renting, which could be a mix of, full out renovations, touch ups like painting and light fixtures, furnishing. And obviously, if you buy a house that's totally furnished like I did, that was a huge savings in time and money and, out of pocket type expense versus something that I could roll into a mortgage, et cetera. So there's, kind of that's where it becomes house by house, and where you can kind of start to develop your criteria of, I'm really only going to look at homes that are furnished, or I'm only going to look at homes that are turnkey and furnished, or not. But if it's, missing 1 or 2 of those elements, then the budget's going to be way lower for those properties. So assuming that cash isn't your option, there are a lot of different financing options. So anyone that needs connections to lenders that have good programs for these kinds of properties, let me know. I have a couple really great people that have helped me. But just big picture, you're going to be looking at a minimum of 10% down as far as your down payment. And then every market's different as far as like what your closing costs would be in like the Baltimore area and Maryland. It's tends to be 4 to 6% additional for all of the closing costs. Hilton Head was similar, but then there were some surprises of like, oh, and you pay this like extra fee to the town and, this, that, and the other thing. So those are things where, working with a local realtor and a local lender, they're going to be more aware of. I actually chose to not work with a local lender, and I don't regret that at all. I worked with one of my local relationships in Maryland who can lend in South Carolina, and that was better for me for a variety of reasons. But I also knew that there were going to be, the town of Hilton Head transfer fee and whatever that I found out about after we were under contract. So upfront, you want to figure out what your down payment's going to be, what the mortgage payment's going to be. Loan products vary by lender and, what kind of income you have, whether you're W-2, whether you're self-employed, and then of course, all of your other debts. If you own, other real estate there, it's just the whole debt to income ratio game that we come across with all mortgages. But second home loans, where you kind of represent to the lender that you're actually going to be using this as a second home as opposed to an investment property, often start at 10% down, starting at the lender, depending on the lender. So that can be a great option. I got a second home loan, but we had to put 20% down because it was a condo. So it could be a second home, but there are just various nuances and restrictions to how things work. So I would say expecting 10 to 20% down is pretty normal. You could potentially get a conventional investment loan, which is normally 20% down. You could use funds from a home equity line of credit. So if you have a primary residence or any other property with a lot of equity in it, you could draw equity from that property and use that for your down payment or to buy the house cash, depending on how all of your numbers play out. I just think it's always a good idea to have a home equity line of credit on your property. I have a great home equity lender if anyone ever needs them. I just have one set up on my house so that if I ever need to do something unexpected, I can tap into that at a moment's notice. So home equity lines are huge. You could also have a business equity line depending on your business, if you have one. There's also something called a cash out refinance, where I don't know who would refinance their house right now if you got the rates of 1 to 3 years ago, but in theory, you could refinance and draw cash out of your current property and do it that way, as opposed to kind of having like a monthly payment through an equity line. A great lender will walk you through the pros and the cons and the numbers on that. You could also partner with someone who, has the money, or could be a co-signer. Like maybe you have the money, but you don't have the like you have a debt ratio issue where you already have a bunch of other mortgages, you could, partner with somebody. So those are things to think about. And again, troubleshoot with your professional team, as I'm just going to keep driving that point home of how important it is to have great lender and great realtor helping you through this. The last thing, which I don't have as much experience with, but is a thing that people do with Airbnbs, is called arbitrage. So if you can find someone who owns a property, this is a way to get started without buying a property, essentially. You could rent a piece of property from someone through a long-term lease, and you would need upfront written permission from them to basically sublet it as a short-term rental. So if you wanted to like get into this business and found, a property in whatever market that you could rent for $1,500 a month as just an empty house, like, whatever, then you furnish it. Probably don't renovate it unless you have permission from the owner to do that. But so probably furnish it and, market it and do all of that and turn it into a short-term rental. That is a way to kind of get into this game without, having the cash and the risk of owning the property. So food for thought. I'm not an expert on arbitrage, but that's something you could Google or find a lot of resources around if that's a way that you could kind of get your foot in the door. So that's the first question, is what can I afford? And it's, going to dictate everything else. From there, the second question I would say to ask yourself is, what is your goal or your strategy? So are you looking to make money on a monthly basis off of your short-term rental, which is why most people are motivated to do this? That term is to cash flow off of a property. When people say that, that means that after you pay all of the mortgage and the expenses and Airbnb platform fees and everything, whatever money is left over at the end of each month is your cash flow, your profit. So that is generally the reason why people do this, because you can make more per week and per month in a short-term rental than a long-term rental. And there's also this sweet spot in the middle that a lot of people are loving these days called midterm renting, where maybe you rent monthly or in like 3 or 6 month increments. And that can be a really great option for a bunch of reasons that I would say is maybe like a whole other topic, but I do have some resources on midterm rentals for anyone who wants to hear about that. The other way that, the way I've approached my Airbnb is we're just looking to cover all of the costs of our vacation property. And in my mind, I kind of feel the same way about my long-term rental in Baltimore City. I put it on a 15-year mortgage a few years ago when, again, rates were incredible. And that took my payment way up. But for me, I'm now 2 years into that mortgage. 13 years from now, like I don't cash flow much, if anything, on that property, the way I have everything structured. But 13 years from now, it's going to be a completely paid off piece of real estate that's probably going to be worth at least $400,000 by then. And I bought it for $225,000 in 2008. So, for me, that's a great strategy that, that could be, a college fund for 1 to 2 kids, depending on what happens with the price of college, I guess. So, just food for thought there, if you're looking more to have, tenants just subsidize the cost of a property for you and just have someone be paying a mortgage off for you. There's this term people use all the time, OPM, or other people's money, basically using other people's money to, build equity in an asset slowly over time. I'm like a very conservative thinker and money person in a lot of ways. So like, I just love that concept. Cash flow would be great. But for me, just knowing that these properties are being paid for by other people is a great strategy. It's totally comfortable. I find it gratifying in its own way, especially, every time we get to spend time in our beach house. So all of that to say, what is your strategy? Because that's going to inform the kinds of properties you look at, your budget, and, all the decisions you're going to make about how you manage it, how you decorate it, that kind of thing. So the third question I want you to ask yourself is, where do I want to own? So if you're looking to do kind of the obvious pathway that I've outlined of, subsidizing or covering the cost of a vacation home, then you probably have an idea of where you want that to be, or some ideas and dreams. Or perhaps you just want, a cash flowing opportunity in any market. So is there a way that you can swing it locally? That certainly has a lot of benefits, because you're right here. It's easier to deal with stuff than when you're from afar. That, and you have generally way more resources in your own town. You already know probably a good handyman, a contractor, a cleaner, those kinds of things, or, they're generally easier to source when they're in your own town. But maybe you live somewhere where it's cost prohibitive to buy in. There are a lot of people that invest in other parts of the country or even the world for that exact reason, where you can get a great property for $200,000, and that down payment isn't nearly as much of an issue as finding the down payment for a $600,000 property in a different kind of market. So obviously, once you know generally how much cash you have to work with and what you qualify for, then you can back that into what market you want to be in and what your money buys you in that market, and does that make sense right now? And if so, great, full speed ahead. And if not, okay, do I need to keep saving? Do I want to bring on a partner? Do I want to research this arbitrage thing? The options are kind of limitless. But from there, once you know your dollars and where you want to be and what your goals and intentions are, it will make it a clearer decision. So from there, then it's analyzing property by property. So I am going to kind of write this up as sort of a summary of like the key steps to follow from here. But number one, get your team together. Realtor and mortgage person are the two big ones for this process. You will ultimately need contacts for insurance and things like that, but those are going to come after you identify the right property. The second thing is you want to figure out, so say, you want to be in X market, that Y is your budget, then you want to start kind of analyzing properties within that budget and evaluate and figure out, what's the income and how can I project what that's going to be? So depending on the market and the resources at your disposal, it tends to be a blend of getting insight from your realtor. If the property has already been rented, getting the rental history on it. So there might be what I would call like example properties that are, listed on the market right now or recently sold in the last 3, 6, 9, 12 months, where you can still access, or your realtor can access, the disclosures that had, rental history. So Hilton Head's an easier market as an example for this because so many people rent. And a lot of, when people have hired a good listing agent, they make sure to like upload those kinds of projections because it makes it so much easier for prospective buyers to wrap their head around, what it could be. So sometimes you can access actual projections for that property or projections for properties that are very, very similar. Other ways that you can get that data would involve leveraging other local property managers that maybe your realtor has a relationship with someone who manages properties just like this, and they can provide some projections for you, especially in a vacation market. And if you're thinking you might hire, a local manager, they can provide projections. You could even call around and see if anyone could help you out. But as you can see, it's not like super cut and dry. This is where you want to do some legwork and make sure that you're getting the best upfront information and making your decisions based off of that. The last thing is there are a couple websites that aggregate data from these online travel agencies. OTAs is a term you might see around like the Airbnb world. Airbnb is an example of an online travel agency. So they will take that data and aggregate it and give you projections of what similar homes are renting for. The best website I'm aware of for that is called AirDNA. So look that up later. You basically put in the market that you're looking at and then pay a fee for the data for that market. There's also a piece of software that I use called Price Labs that is even, I got Price Labs after I got my property, but what it does is it aggregates the same kind of data. I even was able to pick like the top 6 homes that are either in my neighborhood or in the neighborhood adjacent that are all 3-bedroom townhomes in similar condition. I can pull and aggregate what they're getting for nightly rentals and use that to project and price my property to be kind of in that sweet spot, right? Not too high, not too low, not over, not shooting so high that no one rents for me, but also not, missing out on income. So there are a lot of tools out there. And again, this is a little bit of like a quagmire to walk through if you don't know what you're doing. So you want to be able to leverage some of these resources, whether they're people or software, to kind of figure that out. So that's step one, is what is the possible income that I could earn? Another great piece of advice that people give is to project what you would earn in kind of a worst case scenario if you had to convert the property into a long-term rental, which would just be a monthly rental rate, that would surely be sort of a lower overall number, especially without kind of those seasonal wins. If you're in a market where, obviously a beach market has seasonality, but even like cities, when certain huge events come and whatever, there are, just these random dates of the year where you earn more. So with the long-term rental, you kind of flatten that out a bit and don't see the benefit, which is why people love short-term investing. So that's step one. And then step two, which would be directly adjacent to that, is getting your head around all of the expenses. And the expenses are numerous. The biggest one is property management. So if you're going to hire someone to manage the property for you, that is going to be generally somewhere between 10 and 30% of every dollar that you bring in, AKA your gross revenue. So there are what I would call like really like bespoke, turnkey, white glove managers that are, 25 to 30%. And then there's this industry in Airbnb called co-hosting, where you can basically bring on an experienced Airbnb manager who could be anywhere in the world, who co-hosts for multiple properties, and you can add them to your listing and they can help you with, the scope of work would totally depend on what you want them to do, what they're willing to do, and what they charge for it. But there are co-hosts out there that are more in like the 10% range, but they may not be nearly as full scope as like a full manager. So that's person by person, market by market, all of that. But for me, like we ran our numbers up front and I was like, there's no meat on this bone for a co-host. So we self-manage. And at some point, we will bring on a co-host. We might be at that point sooner than I realized. I was just saying to my husband, like, maybe we should just bring a co-host on for summer and like see how that goes. So that's the biggie. Okay. And then right with that would of course be what's your monthly mortgage and your carrying costs for the property. And I'm going to give this to you guys in the like kind of draft projection spreadsheet I've put together, but there are a bunch of other things to keep in mind, like, do you have condo fees or HOA fees? I certainly do. They're one of our biggest expenses because of issues in our neighborhood. Oh, that's the other thing. This isn't meant to be like a vent about the representation I had, but I was not aware that my development that I bought in is like famous for having like the worst board and the worst deferred maintenance in like all of the like huge neighborhood that my like mini neighborhood is within. Right after we bought the property, the prior owner had just paid off what's called a special assessment for several $1,000s. And I think we settled in May, and by June we were already hit with a new special assessment for $3,000 because not 30,000, thank God, $3,000. Everything's relative, I guess, because there was like a property that had been eaten alive by termites because whatever termite contractor my neighborhood had been using, like, wasn't that good and wasn't that proactive. And we've had a lot of other issues. We just had to have our ductwork fully replaced in our property, luckily at the HOA's expense. But basically, like, when you're buying in an HOA or condo neighborhood, there's this whole extra layer of like the fiscal fitness of that, like that piece of the organization, and how good of a job have they done maintaining the properties? Are their financials strong? Do they have reserves in case of an emergency? Because if they don't, all the owners get hit up with the bill to pay for the termites and the ductwork and the roof, and like I could go on and on and on. So those are things to think about, where there's the house itself, but then if there's a condo or HOA, not only monthly fees, but again, if you're looking at any of these vacation markets where homes are like really beat up by like hurricanes and salt air and all of that, that's just kind of been a learning curve for me. Of our Hilton Head house takes way more of a beating just by existing than our house up in Baltimore. And even the HVAC guy was educating me last week. He was like, oh yeah, like AC systems here only last about 8 years because they're run year round. Whereas your AC system at home, could last for 15 or 20 years if you maintain it properly. And I was like, oh, like, of course that makes sense. Let's just add that to the list of the things that I wasn't, thinking about when we got into this. So you've got maintenance. That's my like long answer of saying, budgeting for maintenance, both like the big unexpected repairs, the ongoing stuff like power washing, getting your windows cleaned every so often, whatever the case may be. You've got utilities, paying your electric bill, maybe cable, maybe internet, depending on, the way everything's structured with your property. Another major expense is your cleaners. And that is usually an expense that you pass on to your tenants in a cleaning fee, but you still want to have, total clarity on, who your cleaners are, how they charge, and making sure that you account for that in the way that you're charging your guests. So that is one of our biggest line items, although it is fully subsidized by our guests. That is one of our, consistent outflows every single week. And then insurance, getting insurance on just like a regular property in a market that isn't in like a flood or hurricane zone, it's usually, really reasonable. If you're in a market that does have flooding, hurricanes, earthquakes, you name it, insurance can be more expensive. We have like extra flood insurance that luckily isn't cost prohibitive because we're not right on the ocean. So that's something to definitely talk about with your agent before going under contract, as well as insurance needs. There is also a whole other thing with short-term rentals as far as insurance, which would basically be like, again, it's not just a house, it's a business. So there is an industry of short-term specific insurance that covers you from a liability perspective in a different way than just like a normal insurance policy. Loss of use. So say you have a catastrophe happen with your property, the roof caves in and it takes months to, get a new roof and repair the house and refurnish it. That would be considered a loss of use event. If you don't have that kind of coverage, then you have no, rental income for those months and, no way to cover that expense. So generally it is considered a very best practice with short-term rentals to have that fuller scope loss of use coverage. So we have that. So therefore, the insurance is just a lot more than like in a normal, owner occupied property. Beyond that, you want to be aware of what the taxes are in your town, city, and state for short-term rentals. Like Hilton Head, there's like a South Carolina tax, but then the town of Hilton Head assesses an extra 3% just on the town level. And the platforms don't always know the taxes for every little nuanced area. So we had to actually like customize our Airbnb listing to add this extra 3%, which, I definitely should have like researched it beforehand, but I was just more focused on the big picture of getting everything done. Not a big deal. You are able to pass the taxes on to your guests as well. So kind of you've got like usually, and there's a lot of nuance to how you can do this, but you've got your nightly rate and then they pay taxes on top of that. They pay your one-time cleaning fee on top of that in most cases. Some people do include cleaning, but you need to factor that into your numbers. And then the guest also pays a platform fee to Airbnb that averages 12 to 14%. So they're sort of the marketed nightly rate. And then what it really ends up being is a whole lot more because of everything that I just outlined. For you as the property owner, Airbnb keeps 3% of every dollar that you bring in, including your cleaning fee. So that is another thing to have in your budget, which is mentioned in my little template. So hopefully you don't want to puke by now. You're hearing all of the expenses, but those would be like the very common expenses to budget for. And that's what I would put in like the bucket of ongoing expenses. You will also have your startup costs. So depending on the property, you might be looking at furnishing, redecorating, maybe staging to some degree. I had I brought our stager to Hilton Head with me, which was like the best thing ever because having a pro there made all the difference in the way the property looked at the end of the whole process. And, photography. And I also hired an amazing woman who I will give her name to anyone who wants it. She is like a short-term rental systems setup person. So I had like a, sort of a project, management fee that I paid her where she set up my listing for me. She gave me a to-do list of everything that I needed to buy, helping me figure out my consumables, my sheets, my toilet paper, all of that. She did a bunch of stuff for me, but that was also in my startup costs of getting all of that going. So those are the things to think about, right? So then you can start projecting, what is this going to make or lose me in year one? And then once my startup expenses are behind me, what is, the projection for years 2, 3, and 4? And in the panel that I referenced at the beginning of today, where I interviewed 3 of my colleagues, one of them, Maura, I believe the way she framed it was that, most short-term rentals, you kind of want to expect to take a loss in the first 18 months and then be profitable ideally after that. That's going to depend on you and, all of the like super variable factors that I just mentioned today. But those would be the things that you want to be really fully aware of as you get this all up and running. So let's say you figure all this out, which you can and you will, and you know what your budget's going to be, you know what kind of house you're going to target, you find the right house, you get under contract and you buy it. I just want to outline a couple of the things that happen after the fact. So, once you're under contract or settled, there are a bunch of decisions to make of how you're going to set your house up. The biggest thing at the beginning is, are you going to hire a manager or some kind of professional to help with some aspect of getting it up and running, whether that's full management, a decorator, a back-end person, like I mentioned, who can at least do all of the systems for you to set you up to self-manage successfully. And then getting that team together, or if the team is just you, then getting your game plan going. So that's really the first decision once you've acquired the house. From there, you're going to decide what platform or platforms you want to use. Every market's different. I thought Vrbo would do great in Hilton Head, but I guess Airbnb has just really come to dominate. I rented through Vrbo for like my whole life staying there. So I thought we would have like a 50-50 split. Turns out it's 95% Airbnb. We've actually gotten rid of our Vrbo listing because for me, it's just one other place to maintain. So we're just kind of going all in on Airbnb. So you want to figure that out and what the associated fees are and all of that, and start to get your listing set up. There are some tech pieces. And again, this is where hiring experts who do this every day can be such a win. It was the best investment that I made, having Charlotte do my setup for sure. So she helped me set up that Price Labs technology that does all the aggregating and projecting. Price Labs automatically prices every single night of our property. So it does its algorithm. I've given it some guidelines. I can watch over it and make adjustments when I need to. But that has definitely been a key to our occupancy being so strong, and also our rental rates. We've been getting more aggressive, asking for more, and people are paying it, which is awesome. So those would be some of the really key things to get in place. And then once you know your platform and kind of how you're going to manage your back end, you do need to kind of get a bunch of like templates in place. So once someone books your listing on Airbnb, you're going to want to have some automated messages that go out like, hey, you're booked. We can't wait to see you. And then, the morning of check-in, sending them access information. The morning of checkout, same thing, checkout instructions. If you want to work in, reminders and setting the tone about, I'd love to get reviews from you and all of that. That's really where like your systems come into play. Again, Charlotte set all of that up for me, so I'd be happy to connect you with her. She also helped me set up a guest book, which has been one of our like best keys to success. We made a really nice digital guest book that tells people so much about Hilton Head, my favorite restaurants, where you can rent bikes, why it's a good idea to rent umbrellas on the beach in advance, because guess what? They get sold out half the time if you wait till the last minute, all of that kind of stuff. So those kinds of things have really increased customer satisfaction. People come, they have a better experience. And for me, I get 90% less inbound questions because I send them the guest book at the booking confirmation. So they have like early heads up, and then we reiterate that link at every touch point so that they can basically get all their frequently asked questions answered. So that would kind of be like from a systems and like a templating perspective. And then of course there's setting up your actual house, of furnishing it. And, one of the things that I spent a lot of time on in the setup process, my, colleague and friend Stephanie was there staging and decorating, and I was working with her on that. But I was also like putting we didn't have the right cable set up on our TV. So I spent all this time, like plugging in Fire Sticks and like printing instructions, like little labels for the remotes of like how to use the TVs, and basically like getting ahead of all the things that can annoy people and take away from the experience, or have them reaching out. Like our ice maker is like, the button is invisible. You would never know how to turn it on if there wasn't a sticker on it. So I know that sounds like little stuff, but basically like we were at the property just making sure that someone could stay there and have what they needed and have, as streamlined of an experience as possible. So the other thing we did, of course, was just putting a lot of effort into making sure the house photographed really, really well. So we staged it. I found the best photographer in Hilton Head. It's a one-time expense, paid him a lot more than, maybe just like a regular photographer, if that makes sense. I looked at the light and made sure that we had pictures taken at a good time of day where the house was going to look really good. And this was just like a funny thing. He does a lot of Airbnb photography, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm glad I came at this time of day because if I use flash photography, you won't qualify for Airbnb Plus." And I was like, "What's Airbnb Plus?" Which is like a whole other like tier of nice properties. So that is where just not like skimping out on like some of those things can make a huge difference. I'm in a lot of Airbnb owner, well, no, I'm in 2 Airbnb owner Facebook groups. One of them is very busy. And the people that post in there that are having troubles, you can imagine, especially anyone who's in the industry, it's almost always the same couple problems: not staged, non-professional photographs, poor lighting. And they're like, "Why does anyone book?" And you're like, "Well, it looks kind of scary, so that's probably why." So just getting everything right at the front end, like, 90% of the work we did was before a single tenant checked in. And then since then, we've, just been maintaining, servicing, triaging different issues as they've arisen, et cetera. So you want to basically have all of those things worked out. And the one thing that I probably should have said a little bit earlier on, as far as like a really critical thing, and one of the biggest pitfalls that you can, kind of fall into, is having a really good cleaner and a really good handyman, but especially the cleaner. Cleanliness is obviously like really important to your guests. Timeliness is really important. So if you have a cleaner who, like, we do week to week rentals, which is great. I'm glad we don't have to have even more turnover than that. But it's check out at 10 a.m. on Saturday, check in at 4 p.m. So if you have a cleaner who like misses that window, that's a huge issue. If you have a cleaner that's a flake, if you have a cleaner that's like perpetually late, if you have a cleaner that doesn't do a good job. Our first cleaner met all of those criteria. We had so many issues. And, Hilton Head's a challenging market because, like many markets, it's hard to get the good people. The island has become very expensive and oversaturated. So like the good cleaners are already have a full roster and can only take so many people for Saturday turns. So we suffered through 7 months with a cleaner that we had perpetual issues with. It was so hard. And I probably should have gotten ahead of it even faster than I did. One of the best tips that I can give you if you're buying in a market that you don't live in and you don't know anyone is to join all of the local neighborhood and community Facebook groups. That is where I sourced our amazing handyman. And then again, another amazing handyman when our first handyman got too busy, and then I had to like refill that position. Eventually I got a referral to a great cleaner, and that has really like, our tenants are certainly happier, but for us, like, this managing stress level has gone from like a 10 to a 2. So the cleaner is everything. And then having, especially if we're talking about a place where you don't live, you need your like boots on the ground people that can run over when, an emergency is happening or a perceived emergency is happening. We've had a little bit of both. One tenant felt that it was an emergency, that the propane tank on the gas grill was empty and it needed to be handled, within hours. So my husband and I had a good painful laugh about that one. So cleaner, handyman, and then you want to have, your key vendors. Like for us in our market, having an AC vendor is huge. We've had 2 outages already where you just need someone that can come over. People don't want to be hot at their beach vacation. So you want to have your team together and use resources. Hopefully, you can plug into Facebook groups and, use Google and Google reviews and the realtor that or whatever to make sure that you've got all of that in place. Because when things arise, it's obviously great to have your go-tos and not be like, figuring out where to even begin. So a couple really good questions have come in the chat box, and I do have time to stay a little longer. So I'm going to come back and answer some of the questions came to me as a direct message. If you have more questions, please just start typing them in, or if you want to use the hand raise button, you can just tap that on your Zoom app and you're welcome to come on video and ask me a question. And I also want to share just a couple resources that I'm going to send out in the follow-up email today. So the first one is I'm going to send out a little form where you can let me know if you want information for Charlotte, my systems guru, or for Maura, the full scope designer and co-host and manager that I mentioned. So if anyone wants to make those inquiries, and a lot of you are asking me about lender contacts, so I'm going to add that to the form as well. So if any of you need those resources, I'm going to make that easy for you. I'm also going to share that template for projecting income and expenses. So look for that. And if you have any real estate needs in Maryland, my team can help you. If you need a realtor in a specific market where you want to invest that's out of your area, I can vet and find someone who has short-term rental expertise. I've made 2 of those matches in just like the last month or 2 for people that I know. So just keep that in mind. If you need the connections, I have some great ways to figure that out, because as you've heard 100 times today, that part is really, really important. So those are going to be the main points I want to make. I did write down like what were my biggest major mistakes to avoid. I've already covered 2 of them: not having the ideal cleaner from the get-go, and then also just not having the ideal short-term rental realtor who could have warned me about like the Hilton Head regulations and the shipyard closing fee and the town of Hilton Head fee, and just things that like wouldn't have changed my decision, but would have been really nice to not be surprised by. So those would be the 2 biggies. And the third one that I kind of said today, but didn't say as clearly as I want to get in now, is that it's really important to vet the city, town, and state you're looking at for short-term rental restrictions, regulations, and licensing requirements. Unfortunately, there's a lot of blowback on the short-term rental industry for a bunch of reasons. There's like the hospitality industry that like lobbies against short-term rentals, because basically short-term rentals have hurt the hotel business to some degree. There's sort of the disruptor effect of it just being new, people not liking it, not being comfortable with it. Neighbors don't love short-term rentals if it's not like a short-term rental specific area. Sometimes people have parties, or there's just like random people there every day. So for all of these reasons, there are movements in various towns, neighborhoods, cities, states to regulate, make it more difficult, et cetera. So for example, in Baltimore City, I think it was 2019 where they rolled out a regulation that you could only have 1 short-term rental, and it needs to be your primary residence, and it's a very high bar. Sometimes you can get approval to have 1 more. So there were people in Baltimore that had short-term rentals, and basically overnight, like they had some warning, but essentially like overnight, they were no longer able to have multiple short-term rentals anymore. So that's an example of something that can happen. It's in the list of the risk level. Part of why I like where we are is, although there was sort of this requirement that rolled out and Hilton had to get licensed, which was sort of a quality control thing, it's a short-term rental place. So the chance of it ever being outlawed is like 0. There are certain markets where there are waiting lists to get short-term rental licenses. I have a friend who sells a lot of properties out in Breckenridge, and my understanding is there's like a years-long waiting list. Like there's only so many licenses that they'll issue for the whole town at like a given point in time. So the way to like do it is to buy a house that already has the license and like inherit the license. So that is, as I'm sure you can imagine, absolutely critical to understand kind of what you're getting into. You want to talk to your realtor about that. And I also recommend Googling like short-term rental restrictions, Baltimore, or, whatever the town is, the city, even the state. Just do some simple research. You will definitely find some good information that way. And you do want to be aware, if you're buying in an HOA or condo, or HOA condo combo, which does happen, you need to find out what the short-term rental restrictions, if any, are for your development, your specific neighborhood. There are some even neighborhoods like nearby where I am in the suburbs of Baltimore County, where like there have been recent changes where like the minimum lease is 30 days for like just a townhome development that's up the road, or maybe longer, or maybe those rules have been there a long time, or maybe you move in, short-term rent for a while, neighbors get upset, band together, and then change the HOA rules. So not to be a downer, but those are all things that you really want to be aware of, because this is sort of just a phenomenon of change that's happening right now. So with that being said, I'm going to roll through the chat box. And if anyone wants to use the hand raise button, I don't think I see it right now, but feel free. I'm happy to answer questions. Early on, someone asked me where I find my tenants. So I think I covered that with Airbnb, a little bit of Verbo. There are other platforms depending on the market. There's something called Furnished Finder if you're going to maybe explore the midterm rental sector for people that need a furnished rental, traveling nurses, business people, etc. That can be a really great way to find people who will rent for 1 month or 3 months or things like that. Um, Someone else asked, can occupancy taxes be used as an additional write-off? I'm not a CPA, but yes, absolutely. So, I mean, as long as this is, credibly an investment property, there are some restrictions with personal usage as far as the IRS is concerned of how many days per year you're using a property for your own just vacation or personal usage. If you exceed that, then they would say it's not really an investment property. So you want to understand that as well. But generally, as long as it's an investment property, all of your expenses should be a write-off that pertain to acquiring the property, maintaining it, repairing it, paying all the requisite fees, etc. And then someone else asked, do you need to have a rental license to do Airbnb? Totally depends on the market. You need one in Hilton Head, you need one in Baltimore City, Baltimore County. I'm actually not sure off the top of my head. So it is totally market by market. So I know we have people from all over the country watching this. So that would be where you would want to do your research. And if you want to buy on your own market, tap into, the people in your market who are doing it now. Airbnb Facebook groups are also a great place to learn. So that would be something that I definitely recommend vetting as well. And then we got a great tip in the chat box. Debbie uses a service contract for heat and air on her vacation rental. They service, they come for emergencies, etc. So yeah, those are like the things where you want to have your service contracts in place. Maybe there could be a scenario where having a home warranty could be a good thing, although home warranties aren't always quick with repairs, which can be a big pain point with renters that are like, I don't care that the washer is being replaced in 2 weeks, like I'm here right now. So you definitely want to have your game plan for your key maintenance. Having an appliance repair person. We had an issue with our dryer. We had an issue with our stove already. We had an issue with our ice maker. And actually our appliances aren't even that old, but things just happen, especially with like heavier usage, I would say. So was the process to get my license in a different state difficult? No, so that is again like a state, the license I had to get was from the town of Hilton Head. So I had to fill out a form, pay them I think $150, and I think I have to renew that every year. In fact, I think I did just renew it. So sometimes it's a one-time license, sometimes it's something that you have to renew. Generally, it's probably just paperwork, but you again could be looking at a market where there's a waiting list for licenses, and again, that's where you need to do your research and find the people that are in the know for that sector, whether it's on the state level, county level, etc. So not the most fun part of it, but definitely a factor. Thank you guys for being here. Does anyone have any? It's so funny. I usually don't read my texts while I'm, doing Zooms, but my iMessage is popping up. My people that are checking in Saturday are texting me asking about the crib and where to rent bikes and all of that. So that's just definitely a part of what pops up in this game. You might make the best guest book in the world and then they don't read it. You know what I mean? So, oh, thank you. Thanks, Joe. I'm glad that this was valuable for you. Right now, I just have the one property in Hilton Head, and then I have a long-term rental in my local market in Baltimore City. And I am thinking about turning that property into a midterm rental, probably not short-term, for various reasons, but I'm thinking, there could be a way for me to actually, if you were here at the very beginning, I mentioned, my strategy of, where I'm at with the cash flow there and what could be midterm renting would certainly be something for me to think about. It's mostly like, do I want to furnish it and set it up? So that kind of thing. You guys are so welcome. And yes, Laura, I do have a contact in the Eastern Shore who knows Airbnbs. Depending on what you mean by the Eastern Shore, there's a couple different referrals that I could give you, but happy to make a connection. just don't hesitate to hire professionals, pay them, invest in it. As you can hear sort of the like possible pitfalls today, it is so worth doing things the right way. Um, I think you kind of like pick your poison of what you're going to risk with the DIY versus not. Like we've DIY'd our management because I have a lot more experience already, like doing customer service and templating things. Whereas like the systems and the technology and the local expertise, that's been, more worth me investing in. So you just want to like be really, honest with yourself, know your strengths, know your weaknesses, know the gaps in your knowledge, don't make assumptions. And, you're not going to ever avoid every mistake or pitfall, but you can make your life a whole lot easier by just knowing what gaps would be most reasonable to fill. And yeah, Joe asked how the short-term market is in Annapolis. Is anyone here an Annapolis person? We really don't do anything in that market as far as short-term renting. So if anyone wants to chime in on the chat box, if not, kind of case in point, find your Annapolis contact. And Earlville and Chestertown. Love it. Hilton Head's pretty great. So great. We've got Melissa chiming in about the Annapolis market. So thank you guys so much for being here. I value your time. We've run a little long. Keep an eye out for a follow-up email within the next few days with the recording and everything that I've referenced. And yeah, just appreciate your time and attention. Feel free to reach out if you need any of the resources and introductions that I've mentioned today. A lot of that will be in the recap, but if not, just let me know what you need. And thank you all so much for being here. Have a good one.